Today's story is about a man who is believed to be one of the biggest and smartest fraudsters in history, Frank Abagnale. His story is so wild and unbelievable that Hollywood made a movie about it. You might have heard of it, Catch Me If You Can, released in 2002. Frank's journey into fraud started when he was just 16 years old, back in 1964. After his parents got divorced, he ran away from home and went to New York City. Once he arrived, he started looking for work. He found small jobs that paid very little and worked long hours. But life in a big, expensive city like New York was tough. The money he earned was barely enough to survive. So, Frank started thinking of ways to escape this difficult situation. At the time, even though Frank was only 16, he looked much older. He was about 180 centimeters tall, and even at school, some kids joked that he looked more like a teacher. He had a driver's license, and the only thing showing his real age was the birth year printed on it. So, Frank got an idea. He changed his birth year from 1948 to 1938, making him 26 years old instead of 16. Then he started applying for the same jobs again, but this time people believed he was older and more experienced. Because of that, he got paid more. This was Frank's first act of fraud, but still, the money wasn't enough. When he ran away from home, Frank brought a checkbook with him. He had a bank account where he used to save money from his summer jobs. Sometimes, when he needed cash, he wrote checks and cashed them at the bank. These checks were legal at first. But his friends always said, "You're the only guy we know who can walk into a Manhattan bank, hand them a check, and they'll cash it without question." Even if their own checks were legit, his friends said they couldn't do what Frank did. This is when journalists say Frank's interest in fraud really began. He realized something. The way he dressed, talked, and acted made people trust him. That gave him confidence, and he started writing more checks, even when his account had no money left. Now, Frank had entered a new level of fraud. The checks started bouncing. Banks would send them to the central bank only to get them rejected. Most banks refused to cash his checks after that, but Frank didn't give up. He just went from one bank to another until one finally accepted. One day, Frank was staying at a hotel when he saw a flight crew walk in. There was a pilot, a co-pilot, and 3 or 4 flight attendants. Frank couldn't stop staring. He thought, if I were a pilot, I could travel the world for free. And if I dressed like one, no bank would ever say no to cashing my checks. That was all he needed. Frank says that once he gets an idea, he acts right away, without worrying about how to handle the small details. And so, he decided to pretend to be a pilot. He picked Pan Am, one of the biggest airline companies in the U.S. back then. His first mission, get a pilot's uniform. He called Pan Am and pretended to be a co-pilot who had lost his uniform. They told him to contact the company that makes the suits. So he did, and went to the uniform shop, where he ordered a new suit in his size. Even better, he convinced them to charge Pan Am directly. He said they could just take the cost out of his salary. Of course, he didn't actually work there, but they believed him. Now that he had the suit, he needed a pilot ID card. After some digging, Frank found the company that made ID cards for Pan Am. He called them and said he owned a business and wanted to make employee cards like the ones Pan Am used. He asked if they could show him some samples. He also asked them to make a card with his own name and photo just to test the quality. He used the name Frank Taylor, a fake name he liked to use. The card didn't have a logo or company name on it, but Frank kept working on it until he made a copy that looked almost exactly like a real Pan Am pilot ID. In the weeks that followed, Frank started going from airport to airport, wearing the pilot uniform and badge. He didn't fly any planes, but he walked around, talked to airport staff, and learned the lingo and how things worked. All this time, he kept cashing fake checks at banks. But now, wearing the pilot uniform, it was even easier. People trusted him more than ever. Frank used his pilot uniform and fake ID to build trust. People believed he was a real pilot. That's how he was able to walk into any bank, hand them checks with large amounts of money, and cash them without question. Once Frank learned how airports and flight systems worked, he decided it was time for his first flight. Now, you might be wondering, how could he fly a plane when he's not a real pilot? Well, he didn't have to. Frank used a system called deadheading. This is a real thing airlines offer to their staff. It allows pilots and airline employees to travel for free if there's an empty seat, usually so they can get to their next job or flight. Frank took advantage of this. Since he looked like a Pan Am pilot, he could fly anywhere for free. He would live with the airline crew, stay at nice hotels, and of course, keep cashing fake checks wherever he went. Because he was always on the move, it became almost impossible for banks or the police to track him down. By the time they realized the check was fake, Frank was already in another city or another country. This fake pilot operation went on for 2 full years, from the time Frank was 16 until he was 18. During that time, he visited over 26 countries, took more than 250 flights, traveled over 1.5 million kilometers, but after those 2 years, people started to recognize his face. One day, someone accused him of not actually working for Pan Am. Luckily, Frank was smart and quick and managed to talk his way out of the situation. Still, that moment scared him. He knew he could be exposed any time. So he decided to slowly step away from the fake pilot life and start something new. Frank moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and rented a long-term apartment. When applying for the lease, he was asked about his job. This time, Frank decided to pretend to be a doctor. He said he was a pediatrician from California, a doctor who works with children, currently on paid leave to do some research. Everything seemed fine at first, but one day someone knocked on his apartment door. It was his neighbor, who introduced himself as Dr. Willis Granger, a real pediatric doctor at Smithers General Hospital. Frank was nervous. He thought Dr. Granger might find out the truth. Thankfully, the doctor didn't ask too many questions. In fact, he even invited Frank to visit the hospital to get to know the staff. Frank avoided the visit at first, but just in case, he decided to make a fake medical certificate from Harvard University and started spending hours in the public library, reading about children's medicine, so he could at least pretend to know what he was doing. After a few weeks, Frank finally felt ready. He accepted Dr. Granger's invitation and went to Smithers Hospital. He looked confident and acted like a real doctor. It worked. He started visiting the hospital regularly, just walking around, talking to staff, and pretending to be one of them. Then something unexpected happened. The hospital director asked Frank for a favor. One of their doctors had lost a family member and couldn't work for 10 days. The director asked Frank to fill in temporarily, just for the night shift. At first, Frank tried to say no. He told them, "I only have a license to work in California, not Georgia." But the director said, "Don't worry, you're just supervising nurses and trainees. You won't have to treat anyone directly. Just sit through a quick interview with a medical committee, then you're good to go." Frank knew it was risky, but he also loved the challenge. So he agreed. The interview with the 5-doctor committee turned out to be very casual, more of a friendly chat than a real test. Frank passed easily, and just like that, he became the night shift doctor in the pediatrics department. He was now in charge of 40 nurses, 8 trainee doctors. Frank didn't act like a strict boss. Instead, he gave the real nurses and doctors freedom to do their work without his interference, mostly because he had no idea how to treat real patients. Things went smoothly for a while. But then, One night, an emergency call came in. A young boy had been rushed in with a serious condition. Frank panicked. He didn't know what to do. He stalled, hoping someone else would step in. When he got to the emergency room, 3 trainee doctors were already gathered around the child. Frank started asking them questions like he was testing them. "What do you think we should do?" He didn't have a clue what the real answer was, but when the 3 trainees all agreed on the same treatment, Frank nodded and approved it, pretending like it was his decision, then quickly left the room. And after 11 months pretending to be a doctor, Frank decided it was time to walk away from medicine. He was starting to feel guilty. He realized that people's lives were at risk, and he didn't want to cross that line anymore. So he left Atlanta and the state of Georgia and moved to Louisiana. In Louisiana, Frank reconnected with a woman he had met earlier when pretending to be a pilot. He told her he had a degree from Harvard University, but this time he claimed it was in law, not medicine. During one of their outings, she introduced him to a man named Jason Wilcox, the assistant public prosecutor of the state. When Jason heard Frank had a Harvard law degree but no job, he told him something interesting. "The prosecutor's office is looking for smart young lawyers. Why don't you take the bar exam and work with us?" The bar exam is a written test you must pass to become a licensed lawyer, and since Frank was now in Louisiana, he would have to take the Louisiana bar exam to work there legally. Even if Frank had a Harvard University certificate, he still had to pass the bar exam. The bar exam is very hard, and people say only real lawyers can pass it. But Frank loved challenges, and he did it. First, he forged a Harvard certificate and transcript. Then, he studied the bar exam very seriously and passed it without cheating. He passed an exam that only lawyers were supposed to pass, just by working hard and preparing himself for weeks until he felt ready. And remember, he did all this when he was only 19 years old. After that, he worked for a while at the general prosecutor's office. One day, he met a lawyer who also graduated from Harvard. This lawyer asked him many detailed questions, and Frank felt he might get caught. So, he decided it was time to leave the prosecutor's office and find a new path. Frank's next stop was Utah, at Brigham University. He said he fooled the university and got hired as a professor assistant for 8 months, but the university still denies this. Meanwhile, Frank was wanted by the FBI, who were tracking him closely. Interpol was also following him. Frank left America and went to Europe, where he kept committing fraud. But luck ran out. Interpol arrested him in France because of a warrant from Sweden. This happened while he was pretending to be a pilot and cashing fake checks. After spending months in French and Swedish prisons, Frank was sent back to America. An American court sentenced him to 12 years in prison. During his time in prison, Frank escaped twice but was caught again. After 4 years, the FBI offered him a deal. Help them solve fraud cases, especially fake check cases, and they would reduce his sentence. Frank was a professional at forging checks. He made copies so perfect that even the companies that printed the real checks were amazed. Usually, making these checks required more than one person, but Frank did it all himself. The FBI saw his skills and decided to use them instead of just keeping him locked up. Frank agreed to help and solved many cases. Today, he is 71 years old and still alive. Even though his deal with the FBI is over, he continues to help them catch fraudsters. Now, he works as an advisor and security expert for several companies. Through this work, he has helped many people and institutions and made a fortune worth tens of millions of dollars. As I told you, a movie was made about him in 2002 called Catch Me If You Can. Leonardo DiCaprio starred in it, and Steven Spielberg directed it. The movie was a huge hit, making over $1 billion. Some parts of the movie aren't true, but most are based on Frank's real story. So, this is the end of our story. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel.